Welcome to the 13th Biennial Conference of the Asia-Europe People's Forum, the first virtual conference ever of this platform. The Asia-Europe People's Forum is an interregional network of progressive civil society organizations from across Asia and Europe. It is committed to fostering people's solidarity for a socially and economically just, inclusive, peaceful, sustainable, and ecologically sensitive development within and across the two regions. The outcome of this conference will be in the form of a final declaration that will be presented to the Asia-Europe meeting of ministers. So like a summit who are heads of states from Asia and Europe will have discussions on future priorities and plans. Our particular session this afternoon, Converging Alternatives from Asia and Europe towards our Alternative Regionalism and People-to-People Solidarity, aims to explore the importance of alternative regionalism between Asia and Europe that is rooted in the alternative practices of communities in these two regions. It is our hope, that this opportunity will generate participation of local communities in the lead up to the strategic actions to strengthen a people-to-people cooperation and solidarity between Asia and Europe. So all of our sessions are being recorded, will be recorded, and will be made available to the AEPF website or www.aepf.info. So before we start, just a few reminders so that we will have a very successful and smooth session this afternoon. We wish to remind everyone that we'll have two panels plus a solidarity action. So each speaker will be given 8 minutes and will be alerted if they're going beyond this time allocated to them. There will be an open forum for 10 minutes after each of those two panels. And participants are encouraged to use the Q&A box for questions, comments, and reactions. You will see that box down there below in your screen. Okay, so Q&A for questions, comments, and reactions. And for the solidarity action, we will be banging our pots and pans. A few of us have prepared for this, and participants should also click and raise their hand during the open forum if they choose to if they choose to ask questions. And then later also we will be getting volunteers among the participants who would like to participate in the solidarity action. So I'd like to introduce myself. I am Raquel Castillo of SPEL, Sustainability and Participation Through Education and Lifelong Learning, a long-time friend of this network doing alternative practices, documentation of alternative practices. So now I will introduce to you shortly the first panel of speakers for this afternoon. Shall we show who are the panel speakers? Okay, so first we have first speaker, Dr. Eduardo Tadem, convener of the University of the Philippines Center for Integrative and Development Studies Program on Alternative Development. So UPCIDS ALTDEV, the former president of Freedom from Debt Coalition, an author and editor. He has a PhD in Southeast Asian Studies from the National University of Singapore and is a retired professor of Asian Studies at UP Diliman. The second panelist is Anwar Sastro Maruf from Indonesia. Oh, Professor Ed Tadam is from Philippines. Now, Anwar Sastro Maruf is from Indonesia, Secretary General of the Konfederasi Pergerakan Rakyat Indonesia, or KPRI, a multi-sector confederation and grassroots organization in Indonesia. He was a former labor leader and organizer. Next one will be Miss Judy Ann Miranda from Philippines again, and she is Secretary General of Partido Manggagawa, a political party for workers in the Philippines. She heads the Women's Committee of the Labor Coalition Nagkaisa, which means, translated, it means united. Okay, and this is an NGO for women's workers. She was working full-time in the social movements during her undergrad days in the UP, Manila, so was not able to finish on time. Okay, but got her diploma anyway a few years after, and is now studying masters in public administration. And the last one in this first panel is Ashish Kothari from India. He is an author, an editor, coordinator of Vilkat Sangam, or which means Alternative Confluence, and the Global Tapestry on Alternatives. He's the founder of the Indian environmental group Kalpa Vriksh. I don't know if I pronounce it well, but it's Kalpa Vriksh. Okay, so right off, let us have Ed. So Ed Tadam, maybe you can already start your sharing with
yes,
this.
Micah, will you start the sharing? Okay, first slide, please. It's just a title slide. Okay, my presentation today will focus mainly on what I would refer to as the baby steps we have been doing in the Philippines in setting up or an alternative people's regionalism for Southeast Asian peoples. Next slide. This movement to establish an alternative regionalism of Southeast Asian peoples primarily stems from the failure of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, which is the dominant regional body in this region. The failure of ASEAN to address the issues and concerns of the region's marginalized communities and sectors. Next. So what we have here as some kind of a background, the relationship between civil society and ASEAN is that the ASEAN Civil Society Conference, or the ASEAN People's Forum, ACSEAPF, has been engaging with the ASEAN official process since 2005, so almost 15 years now. And each year, we have been presenting ASEAN leaders with annual statements that reflect Southeast Asian people's issues, concerns, and recommendations covering political, economic, social, and cultural dimensions. However, an internal ACSEAPF 10-year review covering the years 2005 to 2015 concluded that, and I quote, 10 years of engagement with the official ASEAN process have been regularly defined by a prevailing silence and lack of attention and response to the observations and recommendations raised in all previous ACSEAPF statements, unquote. The review also added, and I quote, that individual ASEAN member countries have consistently resisted and vacillated with regards to civil society participation and engagement, and that ASEAN and its member governments have been seen to be more comfortable with the private sector and academic and research think tanks than with civil society. So in 2017, ACSEAPF concluded that the years of our critical engagement with ASEAN have not contributed in any substantive improvements in the state of our people's lives and the environment, and that issues and concerns raised by civil society continue to be ignored. It also pointed out that the lack of meaningful, no, sorry, uh, go back to the previous slide, please. We're not yet here. Okay. It also pointed out that the lack of meaningful dialogue, absence of opportunities for interface with officials, evidence the shrinking space for civil society to effectively shape the agenda and policies of ASEAN and their respective governments. Next, please. So basically, what is the problem with ASEAN? The ASEAN model is what we would refer to as integration from above, established, directed, and dominated by the region's elites, corporate interests, and political oligarchies. ASEAN policies on deregulation, privatization, government and corporate-led trade and investment policies result in greater inequalities, accelerated marginalization and exploitation, and inhibition of peace, democracy, development, and social progress in the region. This regional integration model has bred economic, social, and environmental crisis, extreme inequalities, extensive human rights violations, situations of conflict and violence, and wanton exploitation of natural resources that are overwhelming the region's ecosystem. The ASEAN model is based on state-to-state relations and market fundamentalist interactions. It is not surprising, therefore, that ASEAN pays little or no attention to civil society and grassroots people's organizations. Next, please. So we now come to the need for an alternative people's regionalism. In its annual gathering held in October 2020 in Vietnam, which was an online gathering, the ASEAN People's Forum adopted a resolution on alternative regional integration for Southeast Asian peoples, which confirmed the following. One, develop and adopt a new vision for engagement by civil society with ASEAN based on people-to-people interactions rather than state-to-state relations or purely market-oriented interactions. This new vision shall lead to the establishment of a new people's regional integration process. The new Southeast Asian people's regional integration process shall be based on, among others, the alternative practices of peoples, networks, and organizations across the region's societies. Next, please. So these are the steps that had been initiated by our program on alternative development of the University of the Philippines Center for Integrative and Development Studies, or UPCIDS, out there, which has been going on for almost 4 years now. The first, grassroots communities, popular organizations, civil organizations, and social movements have for many years been engaged in alternative, heterodox, and non-mainstream practices that encompass economic, political, social, and cultural aspects that directly address the issues and concerns of marginalized classes and sectors. As initiated by UPCIDS out there, the first step was to identify and, using participatory methods, document existing alternative practices at the grassroots and community level. We have so far identified and documented more than 50 alternative practices across Southeast Asia. The second step is to link the practices that have been identified and bring them together into regional gatherings where practitioners learn from each other and explore cross-border cooperation. 2 of these gatherings have been held so far, 2018 and 2019, but the third one that was scheduled for 2020 did not push through because of the pandemic. But we hope to still be able to hold a third regional gathering in 2021, even if only online. The third step is to hold people-to-people exchanges between practitioners across several countries. This would enable participants to share their experiences and knowledge, learn from each other, and build networks of trust and solidarity. So far, one people-to-people exchange activity has been held in Java, Indonesia, in 2019, hosted by the KPRI network and participated in by practitioners from Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Laos. The fourth and final stage is to establish an alternative to the ASEAN model of regional integration. And this will show what real regional integration should look like. One based on actually existing practices of Southeast Asian peoples across its diverse and richly cultured societies, transcending national borders, and nurtured by the vision of addressing and fulfilling the needs and aspirations of the region's marginalized and excluded populations. Next, please. The case studies that we have documented so far, we have seen to be primarily imbued by the principles of solidarity, collectivism, social equality, redistribution, cooperation, mutual benefit, and the commons. But they are also mindful of the judicious and responsible use of human and natural resources and the need for peaceful and harmonious relationship with other peoples and with the environment. Next, please. And hopefully, when we shall have finally established this Southeast Asian People's Alternative Regionalism, then perhaps you could reach out to other regions in the world and identify like-minded initiatives that are taking place. And if such initiatives are taking place, we would like to establish linkages with other people's alternative regionalisms, undertake collaborative projects, campaigns, advocacies, people-to-people exchanges that promote a people's alternative regionalism. And finally, and this is the grand vision, to confront and challenge at the global level the dominant model of regional integration. If I still have time, I have an addendum, which is the next slide, by the way. Next slide. Okay, this is just to give you examples of alternative practices that we have been documenting. Economic practices are people-to-people trade through cooperatives, reviving local markets, social enterprises, sustainable food production systems, organic farming, agroecology, biodiversity, zero waste production, building forward and backward production and marketing linkages, and community-based renewable energy systems. The political aspect, we see expanding networks and international gatherings of CSOs on environmental issues, human rights, peace, and human security. But at the local level, we are also looking into alternative modes of governance that are participatory and popularly based. In the social aspect, we have self-help groups and local networks coordinating their social protection activities, community-based health systems based on primary care, barefoot health practitioners, and the development of age-old healing practices using organic and generic medicines. In education, we have alternative learning practices such as folk schools, non-formal centers, and lifelong learning advocacies. In housing, we are looking at provisions for a people-oriented shelter program, vernacular architecture, and housing principles that utilize indigenous designs and technologies. And finally, on the cultural aspect, we're seeing visual artists and performers engaging in exchange programs and visits across borders and boundaries in order to share the richness and diversity of Southeast Asian cultures and arts that are liberative and emancipatory. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ed. So quickly we go to to our next panelist. So is there a presentation for our next panelist? That would be Sastro, right? Okay, so Sastro will talk about solidarity economy and the urgency of universal basic income. So Sastro, please.
Yes, thank you, Raquel. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for this important conference. I'm Anwar Sastro Maruf. I'm from KPRI, Confederation of Indonesian People Movement. The organization, the members are trade union, vision union, Fisher-Folk union, indigenous people, women, and urban poor union. I will share our experience about the grassroots organization response to pandemic COVID-19 and digitalization. Next. Hello. This next. Uh, Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Go on. Go on.
Yeah. Uh, Actually, the working people, have been faced with two major threats. The first is pandemic COVID-19 and digitalization or revolution, industrial revolution 4.0. The threat certainly open up opportunities if we are solid and dealing with it. Capitalism is faltering, but they are always looking for ways to improve itself. But their ways are always at the expense to the working people. In Indonesia, we have up to big problem in from the 2020. We have of the like of working people in the world, COVID-19. And in Indonesia, we have of the mismanagement, multifaceted health, social, and economic catastrophe. For example, is start for the March 20 and 20, total case for the COVID is around 1,000, and government lack of response. So the other problem we also have of the crisis of democracy. This is to problem in Indonesia from the for the working people in Indonesia. For example, is many citizens for the government policy were once arrested and imprisoned. So this is our fluctuative movement also respond in Indonesia. For example, is the government policy on the April until June to 20 and 20, the Indonesia government announced about the PSBB. This is like of the local lockdown, but not support to the basic need to the people. And so many factories close, unemployment increase, minimum social assistance from the government, and strict punishment for those who broke the rules. And so on July until September 2020, the Indonesian government introduced the new normal adoption, like of the physical distance, wearing a mask, and washing hand regularly. But this is for the crisis of democracy as a suppression faster local community for mining project. Vision farmer in the national day for the vision, the government is with violent by the authorities. Many victim from the protesters. And the October, amidst the pandemic, the Indonesian government is issue a controversial bill. We call this omnibus law. This is a job creation law, and that process is serious treat the Indonesian worker rights. And many protesters and rallies against job creation law. The authorities use COVID-19 for the health protocol. This is also the many victim in this case. And in the January until February, the Indonesian government distribute free vaccine, but it's only 3 million people. This is for civil servant, military, police officer, and medical workers. Out of the others, the million people, the rest is the pollution is the pay for it. I think this is crazy policy. So until from the March 2020 until March 2021, total case in Indonesia is around then 1.75 million people the positive the COVID-19, and the Indonesian government intervention doesn't really change anything for so far. So until now, the government is using a policy for the second PSBB, or large-scale social restriction. Next, how our response, our initiative with the people movement during the pandemic in Indonesia. For example, is in May 2020, we have a mutual aid action for the survive. So and in other, encourage civil society organization to oversee the distribution of the social assistance program. This is I think is very good experience how to organizing to the people with the participatory social audit. And so we also the promoting strengthen the local food system. For example, is how to make up solidarity from the peasant to the workers, also to the fisher folk, for example. And we also the campaigning for the collective and cooperative based movement at the grassroots level. And the others, the open and transparency, we release and protect again a job creation law and advocacy for the universal basic income for and social protection reform in Indonesia. Next. This is our fundamental concept of the solidarity economy. Before as I already presented in many in everywhere, and for the we call this popular economy, how to develop and structuring the base of consumption. Also, the second is how to structuring and development of production, and three, how to arrange for the distribution, and four is how to building economic institutional like of the cooperation. Next, this is one case of the community-based solidarity economy. The lead is from the Consortium Pembaruan Agraria or KPA. This is how to distribution from the peasant about the rice to the trade union. This is still running until now, and this is good practices about the how to make up the solidarity or the close the market. For example, is we have also we have a problem for the after the pen from the peasant. This is have many rice, but this cannot distribute to the market. This is we have of the way how to make up the solidarity economy. And the other practice, our initiative in the grassroots, like of the urban farming, family farming, or production hand sanitizer, for example, mask and disinfectant. This is we have many production by the grassroots and the community. Also, we make up the public kitchen. Apart from that, social enterprise and the worker cooperative, we also growing from the victim of layoff for the workers. Currently, the KPRI is conducting research and studies on cooperative from the experience of development cooperative from the grassroots. The output cooperative development module and according with its era. I think we now still prepare of the how to make up the many training and workshop to the many cooperative from the community. Next. So the other activities I think is very important. How to make up the reform to the social protection in Indonesia. For example, is before we very difficult before pandemic we very difficult to the campaign about the universal basic income. We have up there in Bahasa for the universal basic income. The name is JAMESTA, Jaminan Pendapatan Dasar Semesta. So we also have of the building of the for the coalition, and we make up the how to the JAMESTA is reasonable income model for marginal group that have been experience socio-economic problem and discrimination. This is also for the transition. Basic income can be a floor and a safety net for the citizen in surviving the socio-economic crisis and the technological disruption. And JAMESTA and encourage the vertical and horizontal synergy. It is implementation and it can improve welfare policy efficiency. We starting from the taking event for the momentum for the during pandemic, we is the implemented of the social protection policy that are the discrimination and corrupted by the government. There is many fraud even by the Minister of Social Affairs, for example, also this is arrested for the corruption.
Sestral,
Yes.
maybe wrap up in quickly in a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the last.
Sorry.
And this is our experience. We have of the National Congress of the JAMESTA on universal basic income. Many spokesperson and many participation, and the other for the activity for the National Congress of the JAMESTA or universal basic income. We also have our activity for advocacy. This is a building coalition, formulating concept and strategy, briefing the policy. We produce a briefing policy, position paper, and half of the many serial public discussion, making of jingle, short video, poster, T-shirt, and people assembly, and also online mass action. Now the condition, our coalition compiling for the manual or module for the region and major who are willing to implement it, JAMESTA. I think finished. Thank you.
Okay, Sestral, thank you for that. So looking at JAMESTA, the universal basic income, and seeing that before the pandemic, it's something utopian, but now because of this, we're pushing this with the advocacy campaign. It's looking like it can be, we can really push for it. So I go to the next one in our panel, and that would be Judy Ann, right? Judy Ann from Partido Manggagawa. Please.
Hello everybody. I am Judy Ann Miranda from Partido Manggagawa and a.k.a. Labor Coalition. Mabuhay sa ating lahat sa Asia-Europe People's Forum. I would like to be sharing with you what is the response of the Philippine labor movement amidst the pandemic, and our response is a call for a workers' first policy. So before the pandemic started in the Philippines, the authoritarian rule, the misogynistic character of the Duterte administration, the war on drugs, and the massive human rights violations has already brought a big impact on the shrinking democratic space in the Philippines. And with the onset of the pandemic, we can see that through it was a catastrophic response of the government by giving a policy of continuous lockdowns, which resulted in a massive massive impact on the recession of the Philippines, which is the biggest in Southeast Asia. So there is a massive unemployment, hunger, and poverty in the Philippines, which also may have been experienced by the other countries right now present in this forum. And so what has been the impact of this, of the COVID-19 policies of our government, especially the quarantine and the continuous social distancing of the government from the issues of labor and women in the Philippines? So what happened in the Philippines I would like to share the abuses and what happened in most of the economic zones, in the manufacturing and in the different workspaces in the Philippines. In Cebu, Mactan, there was the mother of all layoffs. 4,000 workers were retrenched, mostly were women during the pandemic. And then there were that is a garment factory, 4,000 workers, 90% women. And there are also in 2 apparel factories. There was also the effort to bust the union, and all the leaders and the members who are union members were being retrenched. And of course, there's the issue of a glass factory also, wherein the workers were retrenched from work, but the reality was that it was still ongoing and there was a skeletal workforce. Only the employer wanted to avoid the collective bargaining agreement and tried to bust the union. And of course, there is another university and a geothermal plant in the Philippines wherein the contracts were not honored. And usually the employers would say that because of COVID-19, they cannot honor the contracts. And in the economic zones, you can see that the wages and the salaries were delayed by months and there were wage cuts were being done. Workers were supposed to receive at least $10 a day, but in the period of the pandemic, they were only offered half of their salaries, and that's the wage cuts. So again, in the period of the pandemic, the employers took advantage of the pandemic to exploit the workers and to take over, to violate the labor policies in the Philippines. And so what did the Department of Labor do in the Philippines? So the Department of Labor and Employment, issued issuances and labor advisories which provided loopholes so that the employers can do wage cuts, and they even extended the forced leave of workers from 6 months to 1 year. And also there were the Department of Labor also made the suspension of the filing of complaints of workers in the middle of the pandemic, where there are so many unemployed and workers are in floating status. So this is a very crucial period in the labor movement in the Philippines, where you see the Department of Labor and Employment siding with the employers and issuing policies which are again contrary to the hard-won struggles of the workers for their labor rights. And so what did the labor movement do in the Philippines? Because of the COVID protocols, on the first of the onset, because of the 3-month lockdown, a hard lockdown on the Philippines, most of the activities were done online. Labor Day in 2020 was done on online protests, wherein thousands of workers protested online. And when we were able to resume activities, we did physical rallies. We started out doing rallies in the Commission of Human Rights in the areas wherein we have freedom areas where we could do our rallies. But again, these were not enough. So the workers started with motorcades. The workers started protesting in front of the Department of Labor and Employment, despite the harassment being done by the police and the military using the COVID-19 protocols as an excuse to lock down on the protests of workers, but that did not stop the workers from protesting. So there was the protest wherein the women workers in the International Women's Day this year, the women workers were harassed and pushed around in the Freedom Park, and the posters and the streamers were confiscated, and the women were physically pushed back. But again, the women fought back and was able to do the program. This is part of the fighting back against the policies of the COVID-19. And of course, in the midst of this action, the Nagkaisa Labor Coalition, the biggest labor coalition in the Philippines, wherein the Partido Manggagawa is a convener of, together with Centro, the Federation of Free Workers, the Public Services Labor Confederation, Aguila, United Filipino Service Workers, the biggest labor coalition in the Philippines, was able to form a campaign around the Workers' First policy and called for the protection of workers. It was able to repeal the suspension of the filing of complaints, which gave way to the filing of massive complaints of workers. It was also put a stop to the effort of the Department of Labor and Employment to allow the non-payment of the 13th month pay. And because of the efforts of Nagkaisa, this was it was withdrawn by the Department of Labor and Employment. And again, because of the protests and actions, a lot of workers were emboldened to show their critique of the government and the Department of Labor. And because of the social media pages, workers were able to reach out to the different federations and workers' organizations to voice out their concerns. And this is one of the major issues wherein the women workers, which are mostly the impact of COVID and the unemployment was really terrible, because these are breadwinners, solo parents, women who are discriminated, women who will not be able to find work in the midst of the pandemic if they are unemployed, were able to form unions. Despite the threats of the health considerations, they attended limited education seminars online. They were able to form unions. 5 unions from the ecozones were formed, mostly women and women leaders. And because of these unions, they were able to consolidate themselves and go on a protest in front of the Department of Labor and Employment this Women's Month 2021. And this was the first biggest rally of women, around 150 women in front of the Department of Labor and Employment, demanding that there should be sufficient aid for all workers. There should be a policy of making sure that workers are safe upon returning to work. There should be pandemic pay. There should be quarantine leave with pay. There should be safe transportation for everyone. Mass testing should be free. And then vaccines should be provided to workers. And because of this, the Department of Labor and Employment gave way to a dialogue wherein the women leaders, the newly formed union leaders, and the first-time leaders were able to have a dialogue with the government officials, and were able to demand and make the Department of Labor committed to monitoring the cases of union busting, monitor the cases of illegal dismissals, and to monitor how the workers will be able to get justice from such cases and will be able to return back to work. And 2, we were able to get sufficient aid by getting the government support for aid for workers who are displaced. And again, this is around the policy of Nagkaisa, that along the issues of providing wage subsidy and income guarantees to displaced workers and all workers who are affected by the COVID pandemic. So this is in the framework of the SOLAR, which we call the State of Labor and its Agenda for Recovery. The SOLAR banks on major issues of not only resolving the issues of workers in the factory level, but making sure that the workers' first policy would redound across and over this crisis, because this would be a radical transformation of having a workers' first in the new normal. And then how will it be done? One major plank of this is the call for wealth tax, or tax the rich, and to calling for a war against the oligarchy. And also, the Kaisa also called for a wage increase of 100 pesos across the board for workers to recover their salaries because of the inflation and taxes. So all in all, what we can see is, aside from all these struggles of pressuring the government, getting the influencing public opinion, and getting into protests, whether offline or online, One of the major success of this campaign is involving women, making the demands are straight from the workers, and we get workers' power by ensuring that workers are always represented in our meetings and in our activities. But the major gains is organizing the workers, educating the workers, and despite of the COVID-19, workers' activities did not stop in spite of the COVID-19 protocols. So I think this would be a major framework, and the sharing is important so that we could put forward the policy and the framework of the AEPF of calling for a just, peaceful, and sustainable world. So more power to the workers, and especially the women workers. Thank you, everyone. Judy Miranda, Partido Manggagawa, Nagkaisa Labor Coalition.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you so much, Judy. We go directly to the last speaker for this panel, so that we can maximize the time also, no? So Ashish will be speaking about COVID-19 and the community initiatives in India. So Ashish, please.
Thanks, Raquel. Thanks to all the organizers, and thanks for this collaboration also between the APF and the Kalp Sangam and other organizations. As I'm sure all of you are aware, the situation with COVID in India is absolutely horrendous. There's been a criminal negligence and failure on part of the Indian state to deal with the second wave in particular, and not really be ready with lessons from the first wave. So what I'm going to present today in very brief form is some counter narratives, some examples of where communities have shown the kind of response that could have been built upon to be able to deal with this second wave that we're going through right now. My colleague Shantanu will put some links in the chat for much more information on what I'm going to show. If I can share slides myself, I think that might be easier. Kelly, you're able to see the slide full screen? Is this visible full screen?
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Yes. Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So this is the presentation is built on many years of work trying to work with and document radical alternatives on the ground in many different parts of India. Now we're also increasing it with partnerships in South Asia, looking at a bit like what Ed was talking about, different spheres of life, of meeting basic needs, of meeting aspirations, of going beyond the kinds of very inadequate democracy that we have, also tackling issues of social injustice, inequality, either from traditional times like casteism and patriarchy, or new forms of inequality. And we have almost 2,000 stories of this on our website now for people to look at. Now, what we've done in the last year and a half is to look at how people from many of these initiatives have responded to COVID. And I'll give you a few examples of these from where we can learn lessons. One of these is about 5,000 Dalit women farmers and some indigenous farmers, women farmers. Now, as most of you would know, in Indian caste society, the Dalits are the so-called outcasts or untouchables, the most oppressed section of Indian society. And as women also oppressed in terms of patriarchy. From a situation of this kind of oppression, of hunger, of malnutrition, of lack of access to education and health and so on, they've transformed their lives in the last 30 years to one of what they call food sovereignty, complete control over everything to do with food, bringing back their traditional varieties of millets and rice and pulses, etc., turning completely to organic, creating women's committees or organizations in each one of the villages and a larger federation, and fighting for women's land rights and much else. There's a lot more that can be said. And they've transformed their lives so much that, in fact, the same women who are themselves facing hunger and malnutrition have, during the COVID period, been completely self-sufficient with food, but also provided food for the relief work in the administration in their area. And also completely avoided COVID in many of those villages. A second example is from central India. This is an indigenous belt, highly forested area of India. And here villages have got together over the last few years to create a federation of village assemblies, or what we call Gram Sabhas, and they've fought for reclaiming their collective rights to the forest and the land. And because of that, they have been actually earning livelihoods through the forest and also putting money into their village funds, which became a very important source of providing relief to people who did not have enough to eat, or migrant workers who had gone from the villages and had to come back during the COVID lockdown period. They were able to tide over because the village had organized itself in this particular manner. One of the slogans that a lot of these villages have is that while we elect the government in Mumbai and Delhi, in our village, we are the government. A third example is from Western India. This is a mixed religion and mixed caste village, which as soon as COVID news came, even before the Indian government announced its catastrophic lockdown, this village already entered into all kinds of health measures, safety measures, which they have still maintained up till now. But along with that, they also insisted, just like my previous speaker, they also insisted that all economic activities will continue. Unlike in many parts of India, where because of the lockdown, people were simply not able to get any kind of employment. Here, everything continued, but with all the safety measures in place. And now what they're trying to consider is, how do we make the village much more self-sufficient, even in things like daily household needs? Why should we buy soap from outside? Why should we buy footwear from outside, when in fact a cluster of villages can make a lot of this stuff ourselves? We've documented about 60 examples of this kind in 5 volumes. Shantanu will put the link in the chat for those of you who are interested in looking at many more such examples of community resilience in COVID times. Now, what are the main lessons that we learn from these? There are many, but I'll just present a few. One very important thing is either sustaining, if it is still there, or rebuilding a community spirit. This is something that over a process of so-called development in the last many decades, colonization and then post-independence development and a very centralized form of governance, people have kind of lost their community ways of doing things. Now, of course, we realize that communities are internally also extremely inequitous and exploitative sometimes. So also dealing with those inequalities while rebuilding a community spirit. This is one of the most important lessons here. The second is to establish or re-establish collective rights to the most important productive resources. That could be forests, it could be agricultural land, it could be coastal areas, it could be machinery, tools, anything that is relevant for production, to have local community rights over those. In the case that I gave, for instance, was that of forests. And there you then directly challenge also the hegemony of capitalists. The next very important thing is to localize political decision making also, to create forms of democracy, which in India we call Swaraj. One of the words that is used is Swaraj, which is self-rule, not just for the country, but actually for every community. And to have that right of self-determination and flip democracy over from saying rule by the central government to saying rule, in fact, by every local community in villages and towns. A fourth very crucial lesson was the localized self-reliance as against economic globalization, which has made every one of us vulnerable to the global capitalist economy. Here, these communities are saying, at least for basic needs, we need to be in control, such as with food or energy or water or production, manufacturing, etc. And that then goes along with localized exchanges. For instance, many of the examples in India where people were able to cope with COVID lockdown was where they were able to sell their produce to a local consumer group, not too far away, because they couldn't move very much during the lockdown periods. And this becomes very important because these kind of crises are going to come time and again. Underlying all of this, of course, also was communities' realization that they also have to be responsible towards the rest of nature, to respect the rest of nature, to feel that we ourselves are actually a part of nature, and therefore to respect what the ecosystems and the species around us. And of course, continue to make the state, insofar as the state still exists, accountable for the kinds of welfare services, health services, etc., that it's supposed to be giving. I won't go into this in detail, but this is the kind of more holistic transformation framework that we use to look at the kind of changes that are taking place and to see whether in fact transformations towards more justice and more sustainability are taking place in all the spheres, the political, the economic, the social, the cultural, and of course the ecological. Uh, I'll just end in a couple of minutes, talk about some processes that we have in India and then more globally, trying to bring a lot of these sorts of movements and organizations and individuals together to collaborate, to learn from each other, to share with each other's strengths, to help do away with each other's weaknesses, to build more of a macro critical mass to affect policy change and to affect the sort of larger economic and political structures, and to create a sort of a collective vision of where we want India to be, what is the kind of ideal India that we want. So this is at the national level, and then learning from this and similar processes elsewhere, including, for instance, what's happening in Southeast Asia, to have a global tapestry of alternatives, trying to create a horizontal weaving, not a top-down hierarchical organization, but a horizontal weaving of the radical movements around the world, which are so very critical to both avoiding COVID-like crises in the future, but also if such a crisis does occur, then to cope with them in the way that these communities have shown. Thanks, Raquel. I think that was well within 10 minutes. These are some websites where you can find much more information. Thank you. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ashish. Okay, so we have finished with the first panel of people who are sharing with us about alternative regionalism and people-to-people solidarity. As we have seen from the last presentation of Ashish, building, rebuilding, and making communities more sustainable, from his stories about collective, continuing with collective worker rights and production, which is the same, also similar to the stories that Judy Ann was also telling us, but also touching on and saying there it has to be something holistic and includes ecological responsibility and even making the state accountable. So so we're slowly getting elements to put together so that we can all see what this alternative regionalism and people-to-people solidarity is all about. So now we'll get a few questions that have been posted here for our panelists to answer. And well, some of them have been actually been answered through the Q&A box. Our speakers were responding to them, but it would be good also to maybe articulate this question so that the other participants here can also hear them and engage if they want to. So one of the questions was that with all these community initiatives, and this would really require innovations, of course, and new ways of doing things. But where do we get the funding for this? How do we come up with resources so that we can, push through with these alternatives? So maybe I throw these questions because many of the questions were being thrown at Ed. So Professor Ed Tadem.
The question is about the funding.
Yeah, it was asking with all these initiatives, these alternative initiatives, alternative ways of doing things, but where will we get the funds to actually do them, implement them?
I actually responded to the person who questioned that, and I said that these alternative practices have been going on, have been around for decades, if not more. And they're actually based on self-reliance. The communities don't really need much funds to set up these alternative practices, because especially in the rural areas, they're able to utilize their principles of solidarity, self-help, utilizing the commons, what is available in their areas, indigenous sources of whatever they need. So I think funding is not an issue here. I think it's a non-question at all.
Well, um, it might also be important to when we put together, conceptualize this, it would also be good to put it out right there that um, as Ashish had said earlier also, that the communities are becoming self-reliant and pooling their own resources actually to address their own conditions and also to bring out their initiatives. So that would be one way. But of course, Sastra was also asked about, about a similar thing, how, for example, would it be feasible to have the JAMESTA? Would it be how would it be funded, for instance? So maybe Sastro, maybe you can respond to this.
Yes, thank you, Rahel. I think JAMESTA is still in concept, and for the funding in from the state budget. I think we can also have up the alternative from the like of solidarity people to people, for example. And this is yeah, still concept, and many major region in Indonesia come to us. They need of the assistant for the technical assistant, how to implement it in the like of the district or city, because like of the best practice from the universal basic income in the world until now is not yet in the national level, still in the local level. And the second, I think, the very important, I also the respond for the ASIS presentation. This is we need of the how to the link from the many grassroots initiative in the world. This need for the how to networking, because we can learn together. And I think from the UPCIDS is very good for the how to make up the documentation. And often then is if we have of the good network and good of the working together from the grassroots level for the initiative, this is real the alternative for the how to we can fight together with the capitalism regime in the world. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that, Sastro.
Raquel, can I just add a minute on that on the funding
Sure.
thing?
Yeah,
So,
sure,
additional
sure.
point, if I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean I agree with both Ed and Shastro, but just to add a additional point, which is that right now what's happening is that we have legitimized a state to take money away from us in terms of taxes and other kinds of revenue generation. And so a lot of the money is actually funding is concentrated in the state. And to the extent that the state exists right now, I think we also need to fight for getting that money back, which is to say that the allocations that are made must be made in these sectors for livelihoods, for health. I mean, why do we have such a crisis in India right now? Because all the money is in the government, but they're not putting it into public health, which is what they should have done. So in the short run, I think we also need to fight for that accountability, while in the long run, we work for self-provisioning. I mean, there is no need, I agree with Ed there, that in fact, with these community initiatives, we don't necessarily need funding from outside.
Mm.
But right now, people have been impoverished. in many parts of the world because of colonization or the way in which our nation states have behaved. And so I think it becomes a right to demand that there is also reparation from the state back into the communities.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Ashish, for that intervention. Um, there are a couple of questions more here, but maybe we will look at something that's a little bit cutting across or similar to what others are asking. But it's something like, well, if we have these initiatives and we're looking at initiatives in responses also to the situation, to the pandemic situation now, and these are alternative initiatives of grassroots and people at the communities. Um, how could we sustain this, and how could we make this more effective? If well, the question actually is, how do we ensure that we're able to surmount the divisions within communities, among sectors, among trade unions, and even if others have different beliefs, different ideologies, how can we actually build the prerequisite, which is solidarity, right? How can we go there? But initially, how can we overcome all these, maybe call them sectarian tendencies? So maybe just a few, maybe Judy, you haven't responded yet. The others have already responded. So may we have your views on this, Judy? Yeah.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Um, First off, I'd just like to ask the others on the question on the labor movement in the Philippines. We are working on unity, and we are trying hard. On last May 1, Labor Day, we had the broadest possible unity, working for the calls for jobs, sufficient aid for all, calling for free and safe vaccine for all, rights, labor rights and human rights, and of course sovereignty, because of what's happening in the Philippines with the incursion of the Chinese government in the Philippine soil, Philippine seas. And again, with the issues of using a more popular approach, again, I think it's one of the problems of progressive groups on how we really try to approach the public on our issues, and not to come out as very, very progressive or quote unquote leftist, because we have a challenge of the issues of red tagging, or people thinking about labor leaders being tagged as leftist, and our demands are too radical for everyone to accept. But the reality is, because of the pandemic and because of it and the resulting economic crisis has exposed the worst conditions of capitalism, the gross neglect of the government across the world, and showing that the workers who are already at the forefront of COVID are really the people who we should be putting first, because they're the ones who are making sure that the economy is growing and making sure that things are being done despite the COVID, and the workers are already out there being as cannon fathers for COVID. I think the reality and the radicalization is happening, because the people are now so discontented with what's happening right now. The people are more open to more radical ideas. But yes, we understand that we have to be more creative in using the digital platforms, making social media, making our calls and advocacies more approachable. So that's a very good proposal, Dan. I think that's one assignment that all of us has to do in making us more, so that more workers and grassroots would embrace our demands and alternatives for
Okay.
peace, justice, and a better society for all.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Judy. And with this, we would like to close this panel. Thank you, everyone, for all those questions, and thank you for the responses. I will now hand over the moderation to my co-moderator, Ashish, who is also a panelist in the first panel, but now he'll change role and he's now going to be the moderator for the second panel. So Ashish.
Thank you, Raquel. I hope I can follow your excellent example of moderating. So let's straight off start. I am not going to attempt to summarize the previous session because Raquel, you've already given some of the main points, and I think they also came up again in the responses that the panel gave, and also because I think we're a little bit over time. So I'm going to go straight into requesting our three speakers to speak, and then also have after that round of discussions and then a music session, which we're all looking forward to. Can we have the slides, please, of the introductions to the speakers? So we have three very exciting speakers and then a fourth one coming up later. Alex de Jong is the co-director. He's from the Netherlands, and he's the co-director of the International Institute for Research and Education, works with the funding agency Het Actiefonds, if I pronounce that all right, and a contributor to the Jacobin magazine. We then have Kachchh, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, who is the executive board member of the Backpack Health Workers team, a community-based organization that provides primary health care in conflict-affected and rural areas of Burma, where access to this is otherwise unattainable. He's also currently the human resources coordinator with over 10 years of experience in this organization. He's just finished his master's in public health international in the Khon Kaen University of Thailand. The third speaker is Bong Ramilo. Bong is a Filipino musician and a member of the very nicely named AMP3, that is the Asian Music for People's Peace and Progress. It's a collective of progressive and socially engaged musicians from across Asia, which is helping to build bridges that will unite communities of artists into one village, a village of people's music and art. So with that introduction, I will request Alex to please proceed with your presentation on strengthening people-to-people cross-border solidarity for the next 10 minutes. Alex, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for asking me to participate in this forum, and to thank you for giving me a chance to make a contribution. I will keep it brief because we have a lot of things to talk about, and I'm looking forward to the discussion as well. As a starting point, I would like to say that, of course, I'm speaking from a perspective that is quite different in many ways from the previous speakers, in that I'm from the Netherlands and that I'm speaking mainly from a European experience and from the experience of the European Union. So the first remark I wanted to make is actually when I heard Addendum speaking about the criticisms that exist of the process of regional integration in the form of the ASEAN institutions. I would like to say that many of these criticisms to a very high degree can be made of the European Union as well. There's the fact that this is a regional integration project that's focused on states, on the cooperation supposedly between states and their governments, to the exclusion of the engagement with grassroots movements and people-to-people solidarity and cooperation. The second point that Addendum mentioned that I think is also very much applicable in the criticism from a progressive viewpoint of the European Union's integration project is what was referred to as neoliberal fundamentalism. And I think this is a point that should be kept in mind, especially when talking about the role of the Netherlands in the European Union's project. The European Union, as it has taken shape in practice and not in the theory of a community of values, is a community with a clearly defined core of especially the Netherlands and Germany, and a periphery of countries in the east of Europe and the south of Europe. The Netherlands has, from the beginning of the European Union project, been a relatively important player in this integration project. The Netherlands was one of the original 6 members of the European Coal and Steel Community, which was formed in 1952 and which was the stepping stone or the birth of what later became the European Union. The Netherlands is also the second largest exporter in the European Union, and around half of its exports actually remain within the European Union. So the Netherlands is a country that is very deeply, tightly integrated into the European Union project. But of course, with the outbreak of COVID, everything changed. And I think we have seen the weaknesses of the European Union project in its lack of providing support for the victimized populations and in its failure to develop comprehensive international guidelines, even for its own member states. Instead, we saw what is now a recurrent pattern, that when there is a crisis, the member states of the European Union compete with each other, draw up their own specific agendas, and in that way, actually, a lot of confusion was created in terms of how people were asked to respond to the pandemic, on what they were being told to expect from the pandemic, and in what kind of support they could count on from their respective governments. So in the case of the Netherlands, the first response of the government was actually to play down the risk of the epidemic. And here you can see also a wider pattern, which is that European states have refused to learn from the experiences abroad, have refused especially to learn from more successful attempts at fighting the epidemic in Southeast Asia, in countries, for example, like Vietnam or Taiwan. What was instead adopted was a strategy not of eradicating the virus, but in a controlled spread of the virus. And this was a strategy that was adopted partly by these motivations of a neoliberal concern and of an attempt to, instead of providing social support to workers, trying to maintain the economies operating largely in the way they have done before. And unfortunately, large parts of the progressive movements, social organizations, etc., in my country, but not only in the Netherlands, have failed to come up with the kind of radical alternatives that the situation required. Instead, they often adopted a policy of support for the government initiatives without raising fundamental demands on urgent issues, such as, for example, the need to lift the patent right on vaccines. Today, I saw in the news that the Director General of the World Health Organization has denounced what he has called a global pattern of vaccine apartheid. While today there was also in the news that supposedly because of the success of the vaccination campaign in the Netherlands, the restrictions are more and more lifted. So while here in the Netherlands, the government is telling the population that things can go back to normal, we have seen, for example, the dreadful news coming out of India, and we are seeing the growth of a new form of apartheid that especially for social movements and progressives in, let's say, the advanced capitalist countries, such as the European countries, it should be an absolute priority to mobilize against this and to demand a lifting internationally of patent rights on vaccines, but also to demand more regulation on the production of vaccines, because it's not just a matter of the patents, but also the matter that rich countries are hoarding patents to the expense of countries in the global south. Finally, I want to say that with the epidemic, we can clearly see that existing inequalities have intensified. So here in the Netherlands and in Europe as well, women have been especially hit hard by the epidemic. And partly this is also because women are overrepresented in the healthcare sector. And obviously it has been healthcare workers that have borne the brunt of the epidemic, both in terms of being exposed to the virus, but also in terms of all the extra work that they have been shouldered to do. A second pre-existing inequality that has worsened with the epidemic is the situation of migrant communities and of people of color. So these communities have been hit exceptionally hard by the epidemic for several reasons. One of them is that they are overrepresented in the kinds of manual labor or so-called low-skilled jobs that could not have been done so easily from home by sitting behind a laptop like this, but were instead forced to go to work. Second reason is the poor housing conditions of many poor people, which includes disproportionately people of color. You might be interested to know that of all the developed industrialized countries, the Netherlands is one of the most unequal ones. In fact, the Netherlands is, in terms of wealth distribution, the most unequal country in the European Union, with 10% of the population owning almost 70% of the wealth. I want to end by pointing to two alternatives that have been launched. One of them is, I mentioned that although large parts of the social movements and progressive milieus in the Netherlands and abroad have adopted a policy of support for the government's corona approach, tomorrow there will be a mobilization by the main trade union, the FNV Trade Union Central, to demand not only a special corona epidemic support to people on benefits, but also to demand an increase in the minimum wage as a first step in fighting against this inequality that I mentioned and against the consequences of the epidemic. The second initiative I want to mention.
Alex,
sorry?
Yeah, if you can wind up, your 10 minutes are up.
Yes, I'm almost finished. The second initiative I wanted to mention is a manifesto that's being launched now today to demand for the lifting of patents on vaccines. And this is a manifesto that is circulated internationally and that we hope will contribute to building the kind of links that are needed. I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Since this is a Asia-Europe forum, it's very important that we have at least one or two European voices. So thank you for that. I'm going to move straight to asking Kachchh from Thailand to go into his presentation. Sure, please.
Yes, please share my presentation. Can you share my presentation? Okay, can I share?
Go on, please. Yes.
Okay. So thank you so much to everyone to give opportunity to speak this panel. So, and next, please. Next slide, please. So I would like to introduce my organization. My organization is Private Advocacy. Please, let's pass on, please. Okay, my organization is Private Advocacy, and please, it's very quick. Okay, please, last slide. Okay. My organization is Private Advocacy and established in 1998. At the time, we cooperate with advocates from the Korean and Korean area because at the time there is a lot of conflict in the ethnic area, like in this situation in Burma. So at that time, the IDP do not accept the healthcare services. So we provide healthcare services to them in the conflict area. So our aim is we would like to see this. Okay.
Sure. Sorry to interrupt you. Maybe you can switch your video off because your audio is not so clear. Okay, just to save bandwidth, if you can switch off your camera, yes. And then please go on. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we would like to see our communities. They will be handling their healthcare services by their knowledge and address in their local area. Because I would like to see healthcare services is a sustainable in their conflict area. Because if we intervention for healthcare services is not sustainable, we believe sustainable is the local community need to input in this system, and they need to receive this is their own system or something like that. Another slide. Please. Okay, this map is we show our healthcare services in Burma. So our healthcare program is not only in the border area, but also in the whole Burma of ethnic remote area and ethnic administration area. So moreover, we have two healthcare services. One healthcare service is mobile team, mobile healthcare service. Another is station clinics. So 3 to 5 health workers exist in mobile teams, and 7 to 8 health workers exist in station clinics. In 2020, we have over 400 health workers, and we already treated over 60,000 case load, which is cover over 300,000 population and in both IDP and other vulnerable people. Next, please. So this is a health crisis in Burma. This COVID-19 pandemic is addressing not only in Burma, but also in other countries in the world. In Burma, the COVID-19 pandemic is spread on 23rd March 2020, and second wave is spread in August 2020 from the Sitwe, Rakhine State, Western Myanmar. So at that time, our team is a lot of area and a lot of problematic to implementation our program. However, we implement a new normalized style for our program. So our budget plan for this COVID-19 prevention with the restrict traveling village by village. If you want to traveling village to village, you need to get permission from the authority or the village. And then we set a community-based quarantine for COVID-19. It's in both home-based and camp-based. It's depend on the area and situation. Moreover, we provide the sanitation kits to our targeted community, and we provide personal prevention equipment materials to our health worker for COVID-19 prevention. Also, we renovation our clinics and FIBA clinics for check FIBA scanning and social distancing for the suspect patient. However, in this situation, we don't find that suspect COVID-19 patient in our targeted area. Moreover, we give training for health workers and key volunteer for COVID-19 awareness and prevention. And then we made assessment of gap. It can mean knowledge, attitude, and practice. Another slide. Okay, this photo shows our COVID-19 prevention program. We get knowledge, and then the villagers were sharing their attitude and currently they are practicing for prevent COVID-19 situation, COVID-19 prevention in our targeted area. Next, please. Next. Okay. This is a shoe crisis in Myanmar. No. Last slide. Last slide. Okay. This is a shoe crisis in Myanmar. This is on 1st February 2020 when the military detained Union State region and government leaders because of the military court. According to this situation, Yangon University students began a protest demonstration against the Myanmar military court. Consequently, the nurse, doctor, and the daughter is a start in both the civil disobedience movement. After this, government officials, bank employees, monks, and general public joined the CDM movement, major city and township throughout Myanmar. Another slide. According to that protester, the Burma military and police began to arrest the CDM protester and 88 generation leaders and the blogger. Furthermore, the Myanmar Entertainment Center, they do like this. After this, their violation is escalated and they will be start about gun shooting, season at night and kill the innocent civilian people. This photo showed the police and military not only the violation to the innocent civilian people, but also the violation on the medical neutrality. This photo shows that the health worker gave treatment to the protester who involved the protestation. However, the violation to the health workers. Moreover, they also violation in the pregnant women. Okay, next slide. Also, consequently, the Myanmar military junta escalated a human rights violation not only in the urban areas but also in the Mudra district or Northern Karen state, which is exists the Thai Myanmar border Karen state. On 27 March 2021, the junta utilized airspace with MiG-29 and shoot Dibunu village in the Lumuta township or Mudra district and died. According to these airstrikes, 3 civilians were killed and 7 others were wounded. Moreover, 30,000 people became IDPs and hiding at the Deccan and day to day. So we prepare emergency health plan for those political activists and IDPs. So we prepare for contingency medicine and supply and equipment. And then we set a new clinic near downtown for helping to urban community. Because in this situation, most government department is not functioning, especially in the hospital. So sometimes we have a problem, referral patient, especially like the pregnant woman who want to deliver the baby, there is difficult for referral. So we promote primary care level to intermediate secondary care level in our area. Moreover, we coordinate with local authorities for evacuation plan for political activists and IDPs from the city. And then we got a best facility training to key health worker and volunteer to look after those people. And then we provide first aid kits. Next, please. This photo shows we provide not only the medicine, healthcare services, but also the food, shelter, drinking water, hygiene, and wash program. This food and shelter is from the migrant our community. they donate in-kind donation. So we provide these shelter, food, and hygiene, aid, and drinking water, and everything to that political activists and IDPs. Next, please.
Joe, if you can wind up in a minute, please.
Yeah. So this is our recommendation to international communities. Please don't cooperate with military junta, and if you cooperate with them, you become terrorists. And please vote to transformation to federal democracy in Myanmar, because we don't want to live distressing, and we want to live. We want to live peace. Moreover, international agencies, including UNHCR, need to provide cross-border aid daily, because in this situation in Burma, if you donate, if you provide daily, most sector is not functioning, especially banking system is not functioning. Even who will be withdraw the money, he can be investigation and detain, arrest and detain. So the international community please aware on realistic of community harm and deprivation. Next, please. So we are humans, so we want to live our dignity and rights. Thanks for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. All strength to you for working in such a difficult situation. On that note, I also want to request all participants to please stay on. We are, I think, going to extend about 10 minutes beyond our normal time. But the last part where we will collectively express solidarity with Burma or Myanmar is very important. So if you can stay on, that would be very wonderful. I move on to the third speaker now, Bong Ramilo. Bong is a musician, and he is going to speak for a few minutes and then also show us a music video. Over to you, Bong.
Thank you, everyone. The Asian Music for People's Peace and Progress was founded by Jesus Manuel Santiago 10 years ago. He's also known as Koyang Jess. He's an enduring inspiration to many in the popular song movement, not only in the Philippines, but elsewhere. The AMP3 was set up initially from his contacts. He had a fellowship to visit different Asian countries, and he met many activist singer-songwriters, which formed the basis for AMP3. So we've tried to meet every year over the last 10 years. The last time we met together in one place was in Bangkok in 2019, before the pandemic, at the ASEAN People's Forum. Last year, the pandemic, of course, prevented us from coming together. But what we've been working on for some years now is this process of solidarity and mutual aid, because we're not just musicians and songwriters. We are also social activists. So we share information and work together to in solidarity with each other's struggles. Specifically, we have been working on processes of cross translation, which means translating songs from different countries, from different communities into different Asian languages, so that the messages of these songs from different communities will spread more widely. And secondly, processes of co-creation, where we come together and write songs and write music together, seeking to somehow have a convergence of our different musical and linguistic traditions. So those are works in progress. Now, I'll say a few things about what we did last year during the pandemic. So if we can start the presentation, please. So because we couldn't come together last year, we started a series of online activities using mainly Facebook, because that's our main social media platform. So we featured for the first program the Messenger Band from Cambodia, A. Nitikul from Thailand and Atanrongkili from the Philippines. Next, please. Some of the online solidarity activities we had were performances from March to April. You'll see some of our members. This Andrea Tifay on the top right. She's from Indonesia, but she recorded from Norway or Iceland. I'm not sure for this one. And below her, the photos of the messenger band. That's Ego Lemos from Timor-Leste. And we have Jenny and Chisui-chan, who are Karen, but who are based in Thailand. Next, please. We also had discussions and not just online performances or recorded performances. So we had one about our responses to the COVID-19 crisis. So we had Sandariati and two other musicians from Indonesia in Bali, and we had Chi and Jenny from Thailand at the time, and we had Judy from the Philippines. And Jess Santiago, our founder, is there on the top right. Next slide, please. Some of the responses were not always musical or artistic. There was a food exchange program between Phuket and some highland communities that Chi and his colleagues organized, because there was really no revenue coming into Phuket during the lockdown, and they needed rice, and the Highlanders needed fish. So that was one of the things that were organized. There was a songwriting that happened. We wrote a few songs among ourselves, and lots of conversations, one-to-one and one-to-many, and also Zoom meetings to talk about how we were faring during the pandemic. Next slide, please.
Bong, if you could wind up. I think you also have a video, right?
Yes, I'll just be quick. We also had a campaign to support musicians who lost work. I'll just go quickly. Next slide, please, to some of the things we did this year. This A wrote a song, which we will play later on, about the crisis in Myanmar. Next, please. The Messenger Band also had several songs written, one especially in solidarity with Myanmar during the crisis. Next, please. We had a discussion with Mon Myat about music as the voice of protest in Myanmar. And next, please. And Sandriati Faye worked with Damien Rice to write a song for Berta Cáceres, who was an ecological activist who was murdered in Latin America. Last slide, please. Just our Facebook page address is there if you need to learn more about what we do. Next is if we can play the song written by A. Nitikul in solidarity with Myanmar, and thank you for listening.
เมื่อท้องฟ้าสีทองผ่องอำไพกลับกลายหม่นมัวและมืดดำหรือจะสิ้นแล้วเสียงนกร้องเรื่องราวร้ายรำอย่างเสรีและสดใสมันก็ยังคงใช้ไม้เดิมมุกเดิมแต่โบราณเหยียดให้เป็นข้อหาว่าโกงคอร์รัปชันเต็มเมืองเต็มบ้านแต่ตัวเองมันไม่ดูไม่เคยรู้ไม่เคยจำว่ากระทำสิ่งใดต่อบ้านเมืองเรา จะสร้างท้องฟ้าสีทองผ่องอำไพให้ประชาธิปไตยคืนมาและจะไม่สิ้นเสียงนกร้องกึกก้องทั่วฟ้าเพื่อสิทธิเสรีประชาไม่มีอำนาจใดในโลกล่าผู้ปกครองต่างมาแล้วสาบสูญไม่มีใครล้ำเลิศหน้าเทิดทูนประชาชนสมบูรณ์นิรันดร์ไปเมื่อยืนหยัดต่อสู้ผู้กดขี่ประชาชนย่อมมีชีวิตใหม่เมื่อท้องฟ้าสีทองผ่องอำไพประชาชนย่อมเป็นใหญ่ในแผ่นดินมันก็ยังคงใช้ไม้เดิมมุกเดิมแต่โบราณจะเขียนให้เป็นข้อหาว่าโกงคอร์รัปชันเต็มเมืองเต็มบ้านแต่ตัวเองมันไม่ดูไม่เคยรู้ไม่เคยจำว่ากระทำสิ่งใดต่อบ้านเมืองเราจะสร้างท้องฟ้าสีทองผ่องอำไพให้ประชาธิปไตยเบ่งบานและจะไม่สิ้นเสียงนกร้องกึกก้องทั่วฟ้าเพื่อสิทธิเสรีประชาและจะไม่สิ้นเสียงเราร้องกึกก้องทั่วฟ้าเพื่อสิทธิเสรีประชาธิปไตย
Thank you so much, Bong. That was such a lovely song. Please congratulate the artist from all of us. And I think you and the previous speakers have also shown the power of being able to express solidarity in many different ways, including all the different arts. We can have a very quick round of questions. I noticed there are a couple of questions for the panelists. And then we will move into the final session. And again, a request to all the participants to please stay on. Also, in the final session, there will be an expression of solidarity with Burma, Myanmar, by us banging on our pots and pans. So all those of you who want to take part, if you could please click on the raise hand icon. Let's see. So one of the questions is for Alex, which is, what is the policy on migrants in the Netherlands right now? Maybe you can expand that to the European Union. Alex, can you give a quick response?
Thank you. Well, just very quickly, most of the travel into the country is still banned, and that's a policy that's shared by other European Union countries. There are a few exceptions, but in general, the travel bans are still in place for, let's say, non-European countries. That is still the situation, and I expect it will not change anytime soon.
Thank you. Question to Kachchh: is your organization getting enough funding and supplies to address the crisis of COVID-19, CDM fleeing and IDPs from the fighting in the ethnic areas? Kachchh, would you like to respond?
Yes, thanks for question. We try for cover those people and COVID-19 pandemic prevention. However, the funding is not covered for the whole targeted area. The funding is only covered in the current Thai border area and current in Thai border area, because the conflict at the fight is escalated every ethnic area, so we can cover those people. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll take one final question, which any of you can answer, which is, how do you assess the level of civil society cooperation with ASEAN? This is something that I think Ed also referred to, but if anybody else would like to give a quick response.
Yeah, just probably very briefly, although I referred to this in my presentation of ASEAN's attitude towards CSOs. Major problem here is how ASEAN defines CSOs, civil society organizations, that it will engage with and listen to. And they define such CSOs as those organizations who adhere to the ASEAN vision and the ASEAN model of regional integration. In other words, those CSOs who do not subscribe to the ASEAN vision and the ASEAN model of regional integration will not be paid attention to, and they will not be supported in any way. And we have brought out this mal-definition by ASEAN of CSOs, because this definition goes against all accepted definitions of CSOs as independent and autonomous organizations who are outside the state nexus, and therefore cannot be, controlled by government organizations.
Thanks, Ed. So I think we'll move now to the final session. I just want to end this by expressing, well, firstly, Ed, we have the same situation with the South Asia Regional Cooperation, SARC as it's called. And obviously, as many of the speakers have said, one of the reasons for this is that there's way too much power concentrated in our national governments, nation states, and of course in all the private corporations that also run in our countries. So we have to fight for much more radical decision-making, democracy, economic localization, and everything else that all the panelists have spoken about, and continued fights for solidarity, for justice with affected peoples, including right now in Burma, Myanmar. So with that, and with the hope of much more solidarity and cooperation amongst our different regions, so Asia, Europe, of course, but also within Asia, between Southeast Asia, South Asia, East Asia, etc. There's a lot more that we can do together. With that hope, I will now end this part of the session and hand it back to the organizers. Thank you very much. Is somebody taking over, or the next session would be by Kin Sandar?
Yeah, I think that we should just ask Kin Sandar to talk a bit about, this solidarity for Myanmar at the moment. This part of the, we're almost closing with this, and it's what's going to close this session, no? So
okay, maybe we should just introduce Kin. I'm sorry,
yeah.
I didn't know I had to do that. So Kin Sandar is a human rights activist, civic educator, who's currently very active on the Burma Myanmar crisis. She's currently also the spokesperson of the General Strike Collaboration Committee in that country, and actively engaged in the civil disobedience movement against the military, the Janta. She's also one of the conveners of the Milk Tea Alliance, which I think is going to put up a video right now called "Do You Hear the People Sing?" Kin, over to you.
Thank you all the team for this opportunity to share what is happening in Myanmar. I will be very brief. I won't take that much long. I know it's already long enough. That and also my brothers share what is happening in Myanmar, and most of the people are following what is happening in Myanmar. Let me share a few slides. What is civil disobedience movement currently? Yeah, where are we now? So that all the participants have a better understanding what is happening in Myanmar. Um, so is civil disobedience movement start from Chowder and nurses, and it's followed by employees like factory workers and all the workers. It starts from February. After the coup, February 2nd, we start this civil disobedience movement, and uh, on start from that day, people at night at 8 p.m. we do pins and pots campaign and pins and pot activity, which is in our culture that if the evil is around you, you have to take away that evil from your environment. From that sense, we see the junta, military junta as evil. So we start doing this, and everyone and everybody is taking part of this pin and pots campaign every night till now, even more than 100 days of military coup. And not only that, but also like people are taking on the street that they are not accepting the coup, and in different way and different form and different activities the whole month in February. Start from March, most of the people being arrested and night arrests happening, and multi-hunter crackdown. The protesters, in very brutal way, and many people being killed, arrested. You might heard. Still, people are not giving up and showing the strength and still resisting that they are not accepting the military junta. It's not only Generation Z, the young people, but also different part of ages and different part of different religion, different ethnic groups. It doesn't mean that only from the big city, but also from the state and region and from the rural area. The whole country is uprising. Now we call this a spring revolutions. With civil disobedience movement. After that, that's brutal crackdown. We couldn't go out on the street, and military junta is shooting everyone. And still, we sure that we don't accept that in other form, in different form. Yeah. So, and also like not only our brothers and sisters, but also from different around the world showing solidarity with us, and we got many energy from you all and around the world in this revolution. And also we support each other. This solidarity makes strength, and it keep forward the movement. As people aware that they might be killed, or they might be shot, and they might be arrested, they might be tortured, but still we are choosing, to go out and to protest and to against the military coup. So every day there will be news that someone being shot and someone being arrested, someone being tortured. So we are hearing this, but we are still not afraid to go out. And and also like young people are taking part of self-defense part. It's since from February to now May, it's already more than 100 days. Like more than 781 people being killed, and more than around 5,000 people being arrested, and 5,000 around people being displaced. Those serious violence happening in Myanmar under the military junters. So in this message, I would like to ask all the participants, all people, what you can do and what your state can do. And the first step is you can show solidarity, and also you can push your state, your own state, to do this um, strategy, so that you can, and not only you but also your state can help Myanmar and our world democracy. So I would like to suggest these three global cut strategy is that cut money, cut arm, cut impunity. Cut money means that your state can do, targeted sanction to the military junta, and your state can join embargo in the United States UN body. And cut impunity means that your state can join ICC, ICJ cases. Um, those are the three cut strategy, and also you can take part in three global support strategy, which means that we have national unity government that was elected from the people. So your state can support NUG and working. You can work with NUG and support especially, like ethnic areas who are fleeing to the borders and who have been IDPs places. And of course, the last thing is you can support solidarity with us. So we have many stages after the 3 month. We have called CRPH. We had election. We had some elected parliament member. They form a group, and then those group and other ethnic leaders and stakeholder, civil society group came up together as a National United Consultative Council, and we wrote a federal charter how we will go forward to the future nation of Myanmar. And then we form a national unity government with the people. And the last stage is that the last two weeks we form a people defense forces to defend ourselves. As the brutal crackdown happening, and you can be killed at any time, even though you're not protesting, you're staying inside of the house. Like more than 40 children being killed in their houses. So it means that you are not safety anymore. So we have to build up a defense strategy to defend ourselves. So why solidarity matters? It means that Myanmar democracy is the world democracy, and if one part of the democracy being dark, then the one part of the walls being dark. So it's very important to bring back Myanmar democracy, to show that in 21st century we are not accepting any more dictatorship or any more a group of mother who can take power to a country. So that your solidarity and your support is really important to bring back Myanmar democracy. Yeah, I would like to request to you all to support Myanmar and to support your solidarity. Thank you.
So Ashish,
Thank you, Ken. Yes, Dr.
yeah, so we're now at the end of our session, and we shall end it with a big bang and
Yes.
showing our solidarity that this is the kind of alternative regionalism, different from the kind of regionalism that ASEAN or even the EU are displaying right now. This is a people-to-people solidarity that we would like to show everyone with this online action that we are undertaking now. So, Ashish, any last words before we take our pots and we bang on them to tell everyone What are
No,
solidarity?
Raquel, no. I think this ending with a bang is always good. So let's do it. And all
Okay.
solidarity with Burma, Myanmar, and everywhere else where there is so much repression and oppression going on. So let's do it.
Yes. So we thank everyone who have been part of this session, and we're ending it with this noise barrage. So everyone, bring out your pens and open your cameras, your video, and allow them to have the audio for our crew.
Come on. Blow your nose. Blow your
And this is for democracy.
Here, kiddo. Come here, kiddo. Blow your horn, kiddo. This for Burma. Mixture of Burma here.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. So
Thank you so much.
You can put your hand down now, Dad. Put your hand down.
symbol, our symbol, Myanmar symbol, and now all our symbols. Okay. JAMESTA, is there a song that you would like to share of JAMESTA? While we're exiting, while we're here, we can still. It would be the closing music, no? So who's doing this?
khi mang sợi hoa mây hoa xanh tôi sẽ ở kề sợi hoa hoa xanh thiên sa giờ thì hoa dâu sắm hoa giọt nước sợi yêu dần đầy cầm xanh
xi măng sợi hoa mây hoa xanh hình dân na chỉ yêu trời châu mình kinh khí trời ngàn người vui thích na thân thân chi mùa nhẹ為何美夢仍是個夢幻想感若是泡影我標立在極畫面路實世之大真話像巴數地一係地發對是知是寫寫我同你不來寫個畫麗滿要活呢條天流黃春無畏壓吞並下個跛心中當為家，那真是勇敢的夢想。萬物皆高掛着最為真信仰。甘有決心付出一切，團結一心做伙行。有情呀，都把結苦來讓人贏呀。冷了這波的轉帶回路上為你打。울릴 때 내일이 열려 밝은 아침이